Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a chilling case about someone who caused a bloodbath in a peaceful town. When a crime happens in a small, quiet place where everyone knows each other, it quickly becomes the talk of the town. But if it's a brutal attack on an entire family, something that's never happened before, it doesn't just get people talking, it leads to rumors, speculations, and gruesome stories that eventually become an urban legend. This tragic event took place in the fall of 2010, in a small Australian town called Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000. It's located near the Light River and Barossa Valley in South Australia. The whole town was shocked by the horrific news of a family being massacred. The local police, who had never seen anything like this, were left baffled. Rumors quickly spread, and the story was told in many different ways. Things got so out of control that the police had to partially classify the case to avoid further panic and prevent leaks. The family involved was well known and respected in the town. They had no known enemies, and there seemed to be no clear motive for the crime. At first, it appeared to be a senseless act of violence, leading detectives to believe it might have been the work of a madman. Surprisingly, the real culprit wasn't even considered a suspect at first, and might have gotten away with it if he hadn't accidentally revealed himself later on. Let's talk about the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was born in England in 1965. When he was just 3 years old, he and his parents moved to Australia, where they decided to stay. They settled in a suburb of Adelaide, and Andrew grew up there, attending school. He was known to be friendly, had a great sense of humor, made lots of friends, and enjoyed fishing with his dad. After high school, while studying in Adelaide, Andrew met Rose, a cheerful young woman just a year younger than him. The two quickly developed a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they got married in a small ceremony with only close friends and family. 2 years later, in 1987, they had their first child, a boy named Christopher. In 1994, Andrew and Rose Rowe welcomed their second child, a daughter named Chantel. The family settled in the quiet town of Kapunda and started their own carpet cleaning business. The business thrived, giving them financial stability. Their children attended local schools, where both performed well academically. Christopher, their eldest son, took up guitar and became interested in music, while Chantal excelled in painting, danced, and played basketball. She was known for being kind-hearted and always willing to help others. Chantal dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and Christopher planned to pursue a career in programming and technology. The Rowe family was close-knit and happy. By the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher had moved out to live with his girlfriend, just a few blocks away. In September, 16-year-old Chantal started working part-time as a waitress at a roadside cafe. Since she didn't have her driver's license yet, her father or brother would drive her to work, though she looked forward to getting her own license soon. The crime scene was so horrifying that even seasoned detectives from Adelaide were shocked. Inside the house, it looked like a scene from a horror movie, with blood splattered everywhere on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose were found in the kitchen, severely disfigured, while Chantal's body lay in her bedroom, brutally torn. Each family member had suffered multiple stab wounds and had been dead long before the police and paramedics arrived. Detectives quickly suspected that the crime was personal, as nothing was stolen. Valuables like phones, a laptop, an expensive camera, and even money were left in plain sight. This suggested that the killer wasn't motivated by robbery. The brutality also hinted that more than one person might have been involved, as it would have been difficult for a single individual to overpower 3 adults. Alternatively, the perpetrator could have been a physically strong man. Investigators noticed that someone had clumsily tried to clean the crime scene, wiping away footprints in some areas, but the attempt was abandoned. Bloody shoe prints were also found leading to the door, but they suddenly stopped, implying the killer might have removed his shoes and left in socks. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested that the family had likely known the killer and willingly let him inside, or he had entered through some other means. The family had no known enemies, leaving everyone puzzled as to who could have committed such a horrific crime. Some clear fingerprints were found on the door to Chantal's room, but they didn't match anyone in the police database, indicating that the person responsible had never been caught for any previous crimes. The house was immediately sealed off as a crime scene, and the surrounding area was fenced off to keep away curious onlookers and the press, who had quickly gathered at the scene. To avoid scaring the killer into hiding or fleeing, the police chose not to release too many details about the investigation. Still, rumors of a maniac spread quickly through the small town. People became fearful, avoiding the streets at night and locking their doors tightly. As strange as it sounds, the first person suspected of the crime was Christopher, the only surviving family member. At the time of the murders, he was on vacation with his fiancée in Moreton Bay, Queensland, on the Pacific coast. However, authorities had to investigate all possibilities, no matter how unlikely they seemed. Christopher was the first to raise the alarm when he couldn't get in touch with his family, and he took the next flight home after hearing the devastating news. His alibi and fingerprints were quickly checked, and it was confirmed that he was on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime, so he was ruled out as a suspect. A strange detail emerged from the investigation after the murders. The killer changed into clean clothes and lay on the bed. Bloody drag marks near Chantal's bed indicated that she had likely tried to hide under it, but the killer had pulled her out. Forensic experts also determined that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. This further suggested that the crime was deeply personal, filled with senseless cruelty. Andrew, the head of the family, suffered over 30 stab wounds, while Rose was stabbed 50 times. Evidence showed she had been attacked twice and had even tried to call for help after the first attack. Chantal had 33 stab wounds and had been sexually assaulted. Investigators immediately looked into Chantal's personal life, focusing on whether she had been in a relationship or had any obsessive admirers. It was soon revealed that she had been dating a boy named Dylan for about a year. They both attended the same school, and at 16 years old, Dylan didn't initially seem capable of committing such a brutal crime. Nonetheless, detectives needed to interview him, check his alibi, and hear his thoughts on whether anyone might have wanted to harm Chantal or her family. Dylan cooperated fully with the police, expressing his deep grief over Chantal's death. He explained that they had a loving relationship and planned to marry once they were older. He was devastated by her loss and didn't know how to cope. At the time of the murders, Dylan had been in a nearby city attending his grandfather's anniversary. His alibi was confirmed by dozens of witnesses, and he was ruled out as a suspect. The police had few leads but now had the killer's fingerprints, as well as DNA from the seminal fluid found on Chantal's body. This gave them a crucial piece of evidence that could eventually help them identify the murderer. The DNA extracted from the seminal fluid and fingerprints left at the scene did not match anyone in the police database, adding to the mystery. Interestingly, the family was killed with knives from their own kitchen, suggesting that the attack may not have been premeditated but rather a spontaneous act of violence. The killer took the murder weapons with him when he left the house. Forensic experts determined the time of death to be between midnight and 2 a.m. A neighbor of the Rowe family reported hearing Rose call for help twice around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud, but assumed it was a domestic dispute and did not call the police. No strangers were seen near the house that night, and officers meticulously searched the area for any clues or the missing murder weapons. The police also reached out to the local community through the media, asking for any information that could help with the investigation. However, this led to an overwhelming number of tips, many of which were unhelpful or false. People called in to report suspicious individuals, strange cars, and even tried to link the crime to local biker gangs or drug dealers. There were also tips about social media posts from local residents, but none of these leads advanced the investigation. 2 days before the murders, detectives discovered Chantal's expensive camera at the crime scene. Since Chantal was an avid photographer, they hoped the camera might contain useful images. Indeed, they found many pictures, and the most recent ones drew their attention. On November 6th, just 2 days before the massacre, Chantal had hosted a small gathering at her home. Her parents had gone to stay with relatives for the night, so she took advantage of their absence to invite her boyfriend and 3 close friends, along with their partners, for a quiet evening of movie watching and a barbecue. It wasn't a wild party, just a calm, friendly get-together. Chantal took numerous photos that night, capturing everyone enjoying themselves. Some of the guests even posted pictures from the evening on their social media pages, which the police examined for any potential clues. All of Chantal's friends who attended the party stayed overnight at the row house and left the next morning, with Andrew and Rose even cooking breakfast for everyone. Detectives realized it was crucial to interview everyone who had been at the party to see if Chantal had any enemies, envious peers, or stalkers. They also decided to collect fingerprints from each person to compare them with the prints found on Chantal's bedroom door. Chantal's friends were still in shock over the murders but fully cooperated with the investigation. They came to the station to testify, provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, which didn't match the ones found at the crime scene, and allowed the police to access their social media accounts and phones. They recounted the events of what ended up being the last party at the row house. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, Chantal wasn't feeling well and likely had a cold. By the evening, she had developed a fever and called her boss to let him know she wouldn't be able to work the next day. The following morning, at around 5 a.m., Dylan texted her to ask how she was feeling. He saw that his message had been read, but Chantal never responded. What Dylan didn't know at the time was that Chantal and her parents were already dead, and the killer had read his message. In a chilling detail, the police discovered that the killer had even tried to respond to Dylan's text, but Chantal's phone account had run out of credit, so the message was never sent. The killer had attempted to create the illusion that Chantal was still alive. Dylan, along with several of Chantal's closest friends, helped the police compile a list of everyone she had been in contact with. Law enforcement systematically worked their way down the list, questioning and checking each person. About a week into the investigation, they reached an 18-year-old named Jason Downey, who had previously attended the same high school as Chantal and Dylan. He had graduated the previous year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any red flags. He was of average height, very thin, and appeared completely harmless. The plan was to ask him a few questions and then let him go. However, during the interview, Jason began to act strangely. Instead of answering the detective's standard questions directly, he became increasingly nervous and his behavior started to raise suspicions. On November 4, 2010, Christopher left for a vacation to Brisbane with his girlfriend, intending to return and prepare for their upcoming wedding. However, on November 8, Christopher couldn't reach his family and grew increasingly concerned. After learning from his father's office that Andrew hadn't shown up for work, Christopher sensed something was wrong. He asked a friend to check on the house. Around 3 p.m. that day, a patrol car arrived at the row home. When the local police, who were unprepared for such a crime, saw the horrific scene inside, they immediately requested backup, realizing they were dealing with a brutal triple murder. Jason Downey began acting oddly during the police interview. He complained about not being invited to Chantal's party, mentioning that everyone else had a partner and he didn't have a girlfriend. Then, out of nowhere, he claimed to have an alibi for the night of the murders, even though no one had asked about it yet. His odd behavior made the police even more suspicious. As a result, they decided to fully investigate him, including taking his fingerprints and DNA sample. Surprisingly, Downey remained calm and cooperative, agreeing to all the tests without showing any nervousness. This behavior caused the police to briefly doubt their suspicions, but they continued with the procedures. When an expert collected his fingerprints, he noticed fresh, deep cuts on Jason's palms. Downey explained that he had hurt himself while working at the machine shop, but the cuts looked as if they had been made by a thin, sharp object. When the fingerprint results came back, they showed that Downey's prints matched the ones found on Chantal's bedroom door. All that remained was to wait for the DNA results, which were due in 2 days. The police questioned Downey again, asking how his fingerprints ended up in the Rowe family house if he hadn't been there recently. Downey calmly explained that he had visited the house with Dylan about a month and a half earlier, suggesting that's when he might have left the prints. However, this explanation didn't hold up, as the prints were fresh and clean, not old or faded. On November 16, 2010, the DNA results came in, confirming that Jason Downey had assaulted Chantal that night and was responsible for the murders of her and her parents. But the question remained, why had he done it? And how did this skinny young man find the strength and rage to commit such a brutal act? Jason was arrested that same day. Now, the detectives needed to uncover the motive behind this horrific massacre. Who was Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early teen years. He was the youngest of 2 children and was raised alongside his older brother Jamie. When Jason was just 8 months old, his parents divorced and his mother, Lorraine, took on the role of raising him. His father remarried soon after, and Jason and Jamie had a half-sister named Judy, though they had little contact with her. When Jason was 13, he, his mother, and his brother emigrated to Australia, where they settled in the small town of Kapunda. In their new home, Jason's mother remarried, this time to a local resident. Jason Downey had a difficult time adjusting to life in the small town of Kapunda after growing up in a big city. He despised the quiet, provincial atmosphere and longed to leave. At school, Jason struggled socially. His peers found him strange and most only spoke to him out of pity. He was overly talkative, arrogant, and frequently lied, boasting about his imaginary athletic abilities, popularity, and supposed admirers. In reality, girls ignored him, and his odd behavior repelled others. Dylan, Chantel's boyfriend, played on the same basketball team as Jason and felt sorry for him. Out of kindness, Dylan started inviting Jason to friendly gatherings and even introduced him to Chantel, a decision that would have disastrous consequences. Chantel, who was polite and empathetic, treated Jason kindly, and she had even defended him from other teenagers on occasion. Her friendly demeanor, however, led Jason to develop an intense crush on her, which soon turned into an unhealthy obsession. Jason began to believe that Chantel harbored secret feelings for him but couldn't express them because of her relationship with Dylan. Although Chantel never encouraged Jason's advances or gave him any reason to hope, he misinterpreted her kindness. Over time, his infatuation morphed into a delusional fantasy in which he believed that he and Chantel were meant to be together. Jason became consumed by these thoughts, mistaking her politeness for love, while no one around him noticed the depth of his obsession. Once the police were certain that Jason was responsible for the murders, they knew they had to act quickly to arrest him. However, they were unsure of how best to proceed, fearing that Jason could pose a danger to himself or others. To avoid any potential complications, they decided to lure him to the police station under a benign pretext. When Jason arrived, he was immediately placed in handcuffs, but surprisingly, he showed no emotion. He wasn't startled, scared, or angry. He remained completely calm. During his first interrogation, Jason denied all accusations. He tried to explain away the evidence, claiming that he had left his fingerprints in the Rowe family home during his previous visit a month and a half earlier. When questioned about how his DNA was found on Chantel's body, Jason made a desperate claim. He said that during that same visit, he and Chantel had consensual intimacy. However, this story was easily disproven. The forensic evidence made it clear that the seminal fluid found on Chantel's body could not have remained there for such a long period, either inside or outside her body. This false narrative further exposed Jason's lies and guilt. Jason Downey's confession revealed a disturbing sequence of events that led to the brutal murders of Chantel and her parents. After an argument with his mother and stepfather, Jason claimed he decided to sleep in his car. However, after speaking with Dylan, who mentioned Chantel was sick and staying home, Jason became obsessed with seeing her. His initial plan was simply to drive by her house and look through the windows, something he had done many times before due to his fixation on her. When Jason arrived at the Rowe family's home, it was dark inside, so he parked his car at the end of the street and returned on foot. He found a small bathroom window left open, and, being thin, he was able to squeeze through it without much difficulty. Once inside, Jason sat quietly in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to ensure that everyone in the house had gone to bed. Jason later claimed that his intention was to confess his feelings to Chantel. However, he took a knife from the kitchen before entering her bedroom, a fact he could not explain logically. Investigators believe that Jason had more sinister intentions from the beginning, likely planning to use the knife to threaten and control Chantel in order to fulfill his obsessive desires. When Jason entered Chantel's room and attempted to assault her, she resisted. This resistance triggered a violent rage in Jason, leading him to stab her repeatedly. The horrific attack woke her parents, Andrew and Rose, who rushed to help their daughter. However, Jason, now in a frenzied state, turned his knife on them as well, brutally stabbing both Andrew and Rose to death. In his confession, Jason claimed he acted out of an uncontrollable passion, but the calculated nature of his actions, sneaking into the house, bringing a weapon, and murdering not just Chantel but her parents, suggested otherwise. His confession did little to minimize his guilt, despite his attempts to downplay his responsibility. As the investigation progressed, more damning evidence against Jason surfaced. A pair of blood-stained shoes was found discarded in a deserted area, and the blood on them matched that of all three victims. The sole prints from these shoes matched the bloody footprints found at the crime scene, and inside the shoes were traces of Jason's sweat, further implicating him. Despite Jason's attempts to cooperate with investigators, promising, for example, to show them where he had disposed of the knives used in the murders, the murder weapons were never recovered, leading detectives to suspect that he was still trying to manipulate the situation. Jason's confession did help reconstruct the timeline of events, but it did little to change the gruesome reality of his crime. His obsession with Chantel, combined with his inability to control his urges, had driven him to commit an unimaginable act of violence, wiping out an entire family in the process. The trial of Jason Downey concluded with a sentence that echoed the severity of his crimes. In the fall of 2011, nearly a year after the brutal murders of Chantel Rowe and her parents, Jason stood trial. Throughout the proceedings, he remained emotionless, often changing his testimony and showing no remorse for his actions. He continued to claim that he had no memory of killing the Rowe family and insisted that he had loved Chantel, even though his actions told a much darker story. One detail that stood out during the trial was that after the massacre, Jason had taken Chantel's pendant and chain, which were later found during a search of his room and car. This act underscored his obsession with her, as he tried to keep a piece of her with him even after her death. Despite his claim that the tragedy could have been avoided if Chantel had invited him to the party she hosted before her death, it was clear that his feelings of rejection and obsession had driven him to commit the horrific act. Throughout the trial, Jason maintained a calm and indifferent demeanor. He ultimately pleaded guilty, hoping for a lighter sentence. He openly admitted to his brother that this was the reason for his guilty plea to avoid life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, on April 19, 2012, Jason Downey was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Had he not pleaded guilty, he would have had to serve at least 45 years before being eligible for parole. Chantel's brother, Christopher Rowe, who lost his entire family in the massacre, expressed that while he believed the punishment was just, no court sentence could ever heal the pain of losing his loved ones. In memory of his parents and sister, Christopher had their names tattooed on his body. Despite the grief and tragedy, Christopher has since found a way to rebuild his life. He is now married and raising his son, Kobe, honoring the memory of his family while moving forward with his own. The case left an indelible mark on all involved, with Jason Downey's lack of remorse and cold demeanor continuing to haunt those who followed the trial.